I may have mentioned this in the last class, I forget, is think of a company name, think of a company to design a logo for, okay? And so ideally it should be some like small local company that's personal to you. That's the best thing. Like somewhere that you work or have worked, or a company that a family member owns, or something like that. You know, some place like that. And you need to, for next week, hand in here. This is a different thing. The company name and description here. So like the name of the company and what they do, okay? It could be somebody's pizza parlor, and you're right, it's a pizza parlor, okay? If it needs more, you know, all you do is put a reply in a text post in here. If it needs more description, like saying what they do, then put it in, but just as much as you need, okay? Now, this company can be imaginary, right? Like if you wanted to own a company one day, you know, like in some business, but what would it be? But you'd have to give it a real name. It still needs to be, even if it's imaginary, it can't be random. It needs to be specific. Like you need to know the name and what they do, okay? So it's, and let me give you a couple of suggestions, of things that don't work well, okay? Large corporations, okay? It could partly be just because people that choose large corporations aren't very creative to start with, but they have tended to not work out well. For one thing, a big corporation, you know, what I mean like a Pepsi or whatever that, you know, Nike, General Electric, things like that, okay? A large company, like, well, let's say if it's a small local company, like say Joe's Saw Sharpening Service, right? To make the logo, you got to get some nice type and come up with a cool picture of a saw, position them properly, and you're done. It's really straightforward, right? Because it's going to be a picture of a saw if it's a saw sharpening service or something like that, right? So it's something that you can point at and accomplish. Whereas a company like GE, they do a million different things. And so what's the logo going to be? And it might end up being something kind of simple, but it can't like clearly depict some area of activity when they have other areas of activity also. So it's harder. So do small, local, and personal to you is best. Okay. Another thing that I've noticed doesn't work out well is clothing companies. Okay. I don't know really why. I think probably partly because clothing companies are more about kind of like style and attitude, and that's more difficult to execute than kind of like a simple drawing of something. So, so just a couple guidelines, but think about that for this week, and write that in there sometime. Okay, so we can talk about it next week, and I can tell you what I think of your idea. And this thing here, this part here, I'll get to in a little bit. Okay, so I just want to talk about logo design and look at logos for 15 minutes or so here, and I'll just show you these examples. This is a really crusty, old school presentation I made that I Xeroxed that I scanned from a graphic design book, and it's kind of old school looking, but it's fine. All right, it's just examples of logos, kind of in semi-arbitrary groups. So this first batch of logos is just the name of the company and sort of a distinctive typeface. It's a very boring kind of logo. I'm sure you guys will design better, but it is, it is a type of logo. Here they are. It's the name of the company in a very simple abstracted shape. And I just want to point out here, just to be clear, what a logo is. It is a single mark, and it's usually a combination of drawn shapes and drawn objects and type, right? It's a single mark that represents the company. It doesn't have a lot of other communication in it. It should not say the time that it's open, their hours, what's on sale, or probably even their special catchphrase that they like to use or whatever. It's just a simple mark, okay? And these ones are in this presentation are particularly simple looking, okay? These are initial letter logos, okay? Here, the shapes are a little bit more pictorial, having, less abstract, still abstract, but having a little bit of meaning. Okay, all these logos allude to the name of the company, and I actually made this presentation such a long time ago, I don't remember. They all had specific allusions. This one, I of course remember, it's Shell Oil, and it looks like a shell. Okay. This one I recall is it's something like United Wool Industries, and it's supposed to look like a skein of yarn from the end. It's kind of a cool abstraction. All right, a few more logos. So just to give us a sense of what a logo is. Now, what I want to talk about here is these principles of logo design. Okay, so it's eight graphic design concepts that I'm going to apply to logos. All right. Now, this kind of stuff, when you're actually working on the logo, you're probably working more or less intuitively. At least that's how I am. If I mess around with stuff and if it looks good, I keep it, and if it doesn't look good, I try to fix it. But if we just talk about the concepts for a minute, it's like graphic design talk, and just even though you might not be thinking about this stuff all the time, it's somewhat helpful to engage it on a verbal level, or to hear me do it anyway. So it's a bunch of these concepts that I'm going to describe while looking at these guys. Remember, there's no test in this class. I'm not going to be testing you on it. I'm just talking about it because it may be helpful. All right. So like I said, there's 8 concepts, and they're broken into 2 groups. The first one I call media or materials, and that's forms, colors, fonts, and finishes. That's descriptions of the actual elements of the logo. And the second batch, concepts, is proportion, contrast, repetition, and nuance, and that's the design elements that make up the first 4. Okay, so first off is form. All right, and that's the most important visual quality. Even if all color and everything else is absent, you can still recognize logos by their forms. It's just the shape of things. Okay, these are all in black and white, and they probably exist in color also, but here we're just looking at them in black and white, and we're seeing the form. Okay, in terms of what kind of form, people generally expect to see abstracted shapes in logos, okay, because they have a more generic meaning, I guess you would say. So like, say for example, this shell for Shell Oil, it's not a rendering of some specific shell I found in Cape Cod last summer, okay? It's a generic shell, it's abstracted, all right? It's a scallop, yeah, but beyond that, it's abstracted. This is an abstracted person's face, okay? And in this application, by abstracted, I don't mean like abstract expressionist throwing paint at the wall or something like that. By abstracted, I mean refined or reduced to its essence, okay? You could also say it's a generic shell, but generic sounds kind of like generic. I mean, like clip art or something. It's specific to this. It can be specific to the company or to the application. So the word generic doesn't seem to fit. And let's just say abstracted. Okay, purified or cleared of non-essential components. All right, it's just expressing its shellness, but in a unique way that's for Shell Oil. Okay, so. And abstracted forms tend to be simpler, so they might be easy. Logos get used in a lot of different applications, and if the forms are simpler, it's probably going to be easier to use them on, say, the side of a truck, or put it onto stationery or whatever. But I'll show you some more contemporary and casual logos after this, just so you know that there's more than one way to skin a cat, I guess. All right, so the next two, so the first four, right, are forms, colors, fonts, and finishes. So the next two are colors and fonts, and I would treat them kind of the same way, all right? Meaning that they should support the intent of the logo, all right? So, and mainly that's not being in conflict with the intent of the logo. So for example, if it's some conservative thing like a bank or a lawyer's office or something like that, and you're using hot pink, the first question people are going to ask is why. And you don't want people saying why something about a logo. It should be obvious that what it is, because it could not be anything else. It's made that way perfectly. So you don't want to introduce uncertainty. Okay, so the color should support the intent of the logo. If it's going to be a bank, it probably should be, green and gold, or some colors that we associate with being more conservative, generally speaking. And the same thing with the fonts or the typefaces you choose. If it's some conservative thing like that, and you're using something that looks like a Wild West saloon, or if it's really any kind of company other than a Wild West saloon, and you're using some fonts that have that look, like Tombstone or whatever, it's people going to say, why is it that font? Is there something I'm not getting, or I don't know? And that's not what you want with the logo. Okay. A logo is a formal graphic design project, right? It's like every company wants to look, well, pretty much every company wants to look professional, trustworthy, and a logo is, particularly a small company, a logo is kind of like how they legitimize themselves in a way. So, so it has to be very clean and well thought out. Fonts, and then finally finishes. That's stuff like, which you don't see in any of these, right? It's stuff like drop shadows, gradient, light flare across the surface, things like that. And I would just say you can use that stuff, but wait until the end when the forms are worked out. Like when you put a drop shadow on something, a lot of times people do that just because they think the design isn't really good enough, and they'll say it's kind of like putting a frame on a picture. It just looks more pro if it has a drop shadow underneath it, but really it just looks more like a crappy logo with a drop shadow to me. I mean, you want to get rid of that and continue to resolve the forms until they're resolved, right, or until they look good. So you can use those things, but I would say put them on at the end, right? And also, because it's just hard, it makes it hard to see what you're doing. And also, I mean, we haven't really even talked about drop shadows and stuff in Illustrator, but the way they work in Illustrator is Illustrator is vector, right? Remember that vector thing? But drop shadows and stuff are raster elements that exist inside the vector environment of Illustrator, and they tend to slow down the functioning of the program somewhat. They're a little bit tedious to use, so it's definitely something to leave off until the end, and then you might decide you don't even need them anyway. So that's finishes. All right, and now this second group of concepts: proportion, contrast, repetition, and nuance. Okay. So proportion is the comparison in size between any two, or the comparison in qualities between any two objects. Like if they're aligned with each other, they should definitely be aligned and not almost aligned. And if they're different, they should be different enough that you can see that they're not almost aligned, right? So if they should either be the same size or clearly two different sizes, right? Everything should be, every positioning and placement of things should be done with clear intent, so there's no question, right? That it's either this or it's that. And I mean, I know I'm talking very generically, but I hope you're kind of following me with that. because if it's uncertain, like if things are supposed to be the same or different regarding positioning, scale, and angle of, if they're at the same angle or if they're at different angles, it should be clearly a different angle between the two elements. If it's neither here nor there, then it looks uncertain. Okay, and the way that the viewer's brain is going to interpret that as if things are uncertain, then they're messy. Okay, in a logo, okay, right? Because a logo is, like I said, this formal design, and if something looks messy, that's kind of like a total fail as a logo because the company wants to look legitimate, right? So just make sure that you're clear with your intentions, all right? And as we work through this, that might seem like impossibly vague at the moment, but as you work through this, it'll and you're actually working with shapes and stuff, you'll see that that's a real thing. So that's proportion. The second one of these concepts is contrast. Okay. Now, contrast between if it's more than two shapes, it's repetition. So it's depending, but usually it's a relationship between two things. Okay, and most often it's employed using type. Okay, so actually logos almost always have contrasting type because it's the easiest way to make nice type that's interesting, like this, right? It's the same font family, I believe, but this is a heavier version, and it's bigger, and it's kerned very tight. And this is a lighter version, and it's smaller, and the tracking's open way up, and they're both the same length. I mean, it's a very traditional type treatment, but it still looks nice, right? And this contrast between the dark and the light is mirrored up here by the dark and the light in this part of it, in this, draftsman's triangle or whatever you call that. Okay, so there's contrast there. This Anaconda Industries down here, it includes this spearhead. I don't know what this is really, but there's contrast between the all caps here and the upper and lower case there. And to me, this is kind of like a somewhat ineffective or not great contrast. I mean, it's not really working like this is, right? It's just two different things, but it really just maybe makes it seem a little imbalanced or something when it should be very balanced with this head in the middle like that. So, not every contrast is good contrast, but it's certainly something to employ. And then we have repetition, okay, is the next to last one. So repetition is repeated forms, okay, and you can see how there's repeated forms. If I go to this one, there's radial repetition. These are repeated, okay, even these are kind of, so, and repetition is something that students never use in their logos. So I don't know why. I think it's just something you start to employ after you've been doing a bunch of logo designs or something. I'm not really sure why students don't use it, but kind of keep it in mind in the back of your head as maybe you can find some way that it will help your logo, because it's like repeated forms are one way to add to the structure of the logo, right? And to help it seem kind of bolted together in certain instances. So something to consider. Obviously not only a few of these logos really have it, but it does exist. Right here you can see there's 3 there, and these are kind of repeated here. So, so repetition, and finally nuance, okay? Nuance is subtle details that engage the eye and make it nice, right? It's like how it's crafted. So if you look at this mother and child thing here, it's the way this is just an ampersand, right? But it's a handmade piece of type that kind of looks like a baby, and the way it nestles into this O with these nice negative shapes, it's very nice nuance, right? And if you look at the type, I'm sure that they base this on some standard font, but all the middle letters are custom drawn, like the M and the R are separate, right? But all these are a single, they're not just shoved together, right? They're redrawn as a single shape. And so I would say that this has very nice nuance. This Wella thing here, this face with this point on the end of the neck sticking into the W. I find that to be a somewhat disturbing nuance that I don't like. Just like, what is that? And I actually just saw this logo by chance recently, and it's not like that anymore. This presentation's like 10 years old, so they've changed that. This dialogue down here has nice nuance. Like for starters, it's just like the typeface. It looks kind of like a typewriter typeface or something. I don't know. It just reminds me of dialogue, and the fact that it's all lowercase gives it this kind of an intimate quality. But the cool thing is the G is two, word balloons, like cartoon word balloons, right? So that's like really nice nuance there. So that generally comes more at the end. It's just when you're crafting the thing and putting the final touches on it. So that's a bunch of jibber jabber about graphic design. Maybe it'll be helpful to you, as you're working your way through. On the end of this presentation, there's just about 8 or so slides here that I just want to breeze through, that I scanned out of some graphic design book, and it's not computer graphics, but it's somebody's process of designing a logo. I just think it's just kind of interesting to look at. Okay, so I don't know what the company was they were trying to do, but it was supposed to look like an ear of wheat or a piece of wheat grain. Corn comes in ears, but I don't actually know if wheat does, or whatever the end of a blade, a piece of wheat. My botany terminology is failing me here, but you get the idea, right? So they're just trying some sketches here to see what they can come up with. They're trying to abstract it by making it symmetrical, etc. They're really shooting in the dark and not getting very fast. So they tried to put those little whiskery things on the end of the grains, right? That makes it look like grass or some kind of grain. They tried to formalize it a bit from there, but it really needs those whiskery things on the end, so they put them back on. That doesn't look too bad. These are real low resolution scans, or that's why it looks bumpy like that. It would actually be done pretty smooth. So they took it, and back before computer graphics, you had to get out your transparent vellum or frosted mylar and put it over graph paper and get your ellipse guides and all that stuff and your technical pens to ink something up. That's how we did it back in the day. And so they come up with something like that, and hey, now we're cooking, right? It's starting to look like a logo, right? So they're trying, they want those whiskery things on the end to be longer. So they did that and put it in a triangle, which is all cramped and weird at the top. So they put it in a circle, but now you have to kind of like consider the intent of this thing. It's probably a logo for something like, Bountiful Bread or buckets of, beer or something that's full. And this looks, when you look at it, it's a single grain in the middle of this empty field, and it looks like, the existential crisis of the last piece of wheat on Earth or something. It's solitary looking, and that seems like kind of like what it's about. So they had a good idea where they said, well, we'll just reverse the colors of everything because people don't see this black field as being empty quite as much. Unfortunately, the wheat looks like it's being x-rayed in this version, so they changed the way they rendered it so it wasn't hollow like that, and now it's looking really cool. It does look a little bit like an alien or predator face or something, but maybe that's just me, I don't know. So they tried it in a triangle and they put it in a circle, and that's it, they're done. Okay, now so they can show that to the customer, and any customer is going to want to see 3 or 4. You don't show a customer just one idea. So they also showed them this, right, which you can see how it developed. It's an abstraction, a different kind of abstraction from a piece of wheat, very abstracted, but I don't know which one I like better or if I like either one, but it kind of depends on what the company is. So anyway, that's just a sort of fun look at somebody's process. All right, so on to the exercise I have for you guys today, and let's see let me show you why I want you to do it. All right, so here is some logos with type, the way students or beginner designers normally make a logo. The type is too small and too uninteresting, and it's not carrying the weight of the logo, right? It's all the attention is on the shape, and students do that because whether they're good drawers or not, people know when something's drawn right or when it isn't, and it's pretty much like, well, I didn't draw that good, so I got to figure something out. They know what to do, right? Whereas when it comes to designing type, it's just not that obvious. It's like, oh, I don't really know what to do. I mean, this is nice shape, but this, how do we make the type bigger or better, right? So here's these same logos with good type, okay? And you can see, oh, well, now it's a logo, right? Because the type has to be doing 50% of the work, right? Or somewhere in that neighborhood. It has to be doing some of the lifting. And when you look at these with good type's actually more dominant, right, than the shape. Right, this is the logo this is kind of like adds to it, but so when you look at them, what's the difference between this and this? Well, these are bigger, right, and it's nicer fonts and they're positioned nicely, but they all employ contrast, right? It's the same font, I think, here, but it's just bigger upper and lowercase, and this is all uppercase and smaller. This is two fonts, same color, big bold font and this simple font, right? Sans serif. Here it's the same fonts, but it's different colors, and it's appropriate here because it's mirroring the contrast over here, right? So that's cool. Two fonts, three fonts. Okay, so and there's nice contrast. This one's a weird contrast because they're kind of harmonizing, but it looks pretty good anyway. These are more of like a clear contrast here. So I want to give you guys an exercise where all you're doing is the type part of logo design before we get into the actual logo. So here's the deal. Let me go into Illustrator. So I'm giving you guys this Illustrator file with these shapes. All right. So just accept these as this is the shape that's going to be used for the logo, and you come up with a dozen different logo designs in this area using these shapes. So you're the typographer, and that's all you're doing is typography. All right. This has nothing to do with your final logo project. This can be just random silly company names. They don't even have to mean anything. Like here's an example of this is the whoops. This is the one I did. Okay. Obviously, this is more than a dozen. I did this during class when students were working on theirs, and I was just kind of standing around bored waiting. So I just started making logos. Okay. It doesn't even really need to make sense. I mean, if it does, it's good. But half of these do, and some kind of I don't know what they are. But I just use the shape. Right, Zink's hill skating. There's the little shape. Okay. So if you look at these, pretty much all of them have some kind of contrast in the type, and the type is two separate pieces. Right. This is a piece. This is a piece. I make the types two separate lines. Click once with the type tool and then again, because it's much easier to separate it. All right. So what you need to do is a dozen in this space. This is 15, so I know you can do a dozen, and have them far apart enough that they're separate. And when students are walking around this, are working on this, I walk around the room, and this is the thing I find myself saying over and over again. Okay. People make the type too small, so make the type bigger. Okay. Now, one thing to avoid. When I started doing this, I kind of fell into a trap, and then I got out of it with these ones, is don't try to build anything out of these shapes. Like some of these, like I kind of like tried to make something here, or like this with a mountain. Don't do that. Just like it's better to just accept the shape, right? As the shape for the logo, right? Global impact, that's it. Whatever that is. Okay, I'm just using that shape. So your job is typographer. If you're doing this project and you're doing something that's not working on type, you're doing the wrong thing. Okay. So just to get started, you take this thing and you say, first of all, please leave this stack over here on the right sides, so you always have that access, and just hold down Alt, drag a copy, all right, and then say, well, this could be some shipping company, it could be something to do with gemstones or something. Maybe that's a gem, or it's like just a kind of like an idea or a light or something, and you get a piece of type out there, and it's lorem ipsum. Let's not do actually that. Don't use myriad. Okay, that was, I think I mentioned back earlier on that that's a rule for this class, is don't do anything with myriad. Okay, because it's the default font. I want you to always choose some font. All right. So, and then maybe I'm gonna have two jiggers, whatever that is, and maybe I'll find, or jiggers are like thingamajigs, right? And try them, and then figure out where am I going to put this, and where does this go, and should it be big or small? And as you scale everything in this project, make sure you're always holding down Shift, right? Because we don't want to see stuff like this, right? These are the shapes. Don't screw up the shapes. And this is the type. Don't do this stuff, okay? That is, like I said, logos are formal design projects. We do not distort type, okay? Unless you can supply a one-page written essay on why you need to distort the type, okay? But mostly people do it just because they don't know what they're doing, all right? If you want tall, skinny type, okay, go find a font that's tall and skinny. If you don't have any cool fonts on your computer that are not enough to make this fun, go to 1001freefonts.com and just download. They got way more than 1001 fonts there. You can download them all day long until you're blue in the face. And there's other places like that too. I just happen to know I've used that. I think it's 1001freefonts.com. Or I know I've used that, and they got, you can just do like a search as like if you want sci-fi fonts or, robot looking fonts or whatever, you can search through and find dozens just with it to follow to fill any kind of description like that. So that's what we'll do. And then, so a dozen logos. So I probably need to, when you scale it, remember, hold Shift down when you scale it too. So the type doesn't get stretched, right? You want to get a dozen up here and leave enough space between them so that there's room. And then we're just going to hand that in. So this is just to get a workout with doing type and making nice looking type, right? If it's two lines of type and they're both exactly the same, that's probably not good enough. So try to find a way to treat the type that it's doing at least half the lifting on the logo, particularly because these are really boring and stupid looking. I mean, they're just lame shapes, so you need to have good type to try and make something interesting. So some of these, I mean, like this is pretty out there, right? But it's really just the only shape is just that, that water shape in there. Oh, one thing you can do though, is you'll notice I use just black rectangles a lot because I like to make white type as part of the contrast. So you can do that. You can put black rectangles on there wherever you need to. I don't think there's ever a reason for white rectangles. Here I use that line. The one thing that's kind of hard to use is this line interval thing here. It's an Illustrator blend shape. It's kind of like a compound shape, but I mostly just use it as like, not with any real meaning, but kind of like as a design element, or white. You can make it white and put it on top of the letters too. Here's like two of them going in both directions. Okay, so when you get that done, just file, export as, and in this case, I would definitely use artboards, right? Because that's going to give you the exact page. If not, like if I export this without use artboards, it's going to make a JPEG that's exactly the dimensions of what I drew on there, which is going to be kind of sloppy and random looking. So use artboards. And then let's see, back to here, where are we going to submit it? So hand in assignments here, week 7. All right, so logo text exercise. That's the thing I was just describing, or logo warm up or whatever. So you put the JPEG there, and here the company name and description of the company you want to design a logo for. So you have a week. Just have it in there by next class because I want to talk about them. Okay. I'll give you my feedback on what I think about it and if I think there might be any problems. So you got a week to just think of something. Oh, one other, if you can't think of something, I have usually most semesters I have some company that's looking for a logo. Quite a few in this class, quite a few logos have gone on to actually be used by the company. I've been doing this project for a pretty long time, and we usually can develop a decent logo by the end of it. There's quite a lot of steps that go into it and stuff. We're just at the beginning of the process here. Anyway, I have one company. If you can't think of something, you can give this a try. Okay. If you know Maya Green, she's a professor here at the college that teaches communication, and she has a farm that she grows, like pigs on and stuff like that, and it's Green Heart Farms. Okay, and it's just that's the name of the farm, and they grow different stuff, but Green Heart Farms, 3 words. And if you choose that, she sent me an email a while ago with some ideas of what they'd like it to look like and stuff like that. So if you can't come up with something else, if you don't have something you like, try that. And we tried it last year, one semester, and I actually didn't get any that really came out good enough for her to use, but maybe this semester somebody will. So consider that, or whatever you want to do. Okay. I think that's it. So have fun playing with type and doing that warm-up logo. Think of this, and that's all we got to do for this week. All right. And after that, we'll start on the actual. I'll show you how to get started to actually design the logo. We'll start out with 4 rough ideas, and then pick one and develop it into a finished logo. It'll take us a few weeks to do.